So I'm going to give the torque specs here first. So your caliper guide pins, they're 22 foot-pounds. Then your caliper mounts, they're 70 foot-pounds. They used a 10 millimeter Allen. And your wheel lug nuts, 95 foot-pounds. I'm going to list a couple more here. If you have a car with rear disc brakes, the rear caliper guide pins, they'd be similar to these. They're 59 foot-pounds on the rear. And then rear wheel cylinder, if you have drums on the rear, 80 inch-pounds. Remember, that's only like 6 foot-pounds, so it's 80 inch-pounds on that one. Basically not very tight. So that's the torque specs on this Saturn L-100 brakes here anyways. I wanted to list them first in case that's all somebody needs to know on the video. Then it'll continue on where I show it tearing the front rotor off the car. So I'm replacing the brake rotor and putting new pads on this 2002 Saturn L-100. So the first tools you need are 19 millimeter socket to get your lug bolts off, or the one that comes with the car, but I always use a socket. Then you need a 10 millimeter Allen and a 7 millimeter and a 5 millimeter. The 5 millimeter, there's a rotor retaining bolt that you have to take out, and it's 5 millimeter Allen head. Then the caliper bolts are behind these little plugs. The pins, caliper pin bolts behind those little plugs, they're 7 millimeter Allen. And then these caliper mount bolts, they're 10 millimeter. So those are the initial tools that you will need to get started on this job. Okay, so continuing on, basically you have to pull these little plastic plugs out of the caliper pin bolt holes there. Pull them out, then you can get at the caliper pins. I got the two of them out already. As you can see, they're 7 millimeter Allen head there. So when you go to take them off, put your ratchet in, whatever, you have to pull upward to undo them. It's when you're operating backwards like that, it's easy to get it wrong, but you put it in, you rotate up. Now I find with these things, as you're getting close to the end, I put a little bit of pressure, say this way. They kind of like to stay in there, so you have to kind of walk their way out of the tube. I think you'll discover what I'm talking about when you go to take them off. I got to add a couple more tools to the list here. Straight blade screwdriver and needle nose pliers, maybe vice grips. The reason is we have this spring here, and what I'd advise you to do before you start the job, take a photograph, say from back here, of this spring, how it goes in, because it's the next thing to come off. So to do that, just prise out of the hole there, but once you get it out, oh, it just came flying off. That's a spring. This one's plenty rusty, but it can be a little bit interesting to figure out how it goes back on. That's why I say take a photograph of the setup first. That can save your bacon on a lot of jobs, especially on like drum brakes on the back. Take a bunch of photos first. If you don't, you might regret it. Now, since I've got the pins out, it should be ready to pry the caliper off. Probably need a bigger screwdriver than this, maybe a pry bar. This one's not going to quite do it, but just get a pry bar, stick it in there, wiggle it around. It'll come off. Like I say, it's pretty well ready to come off there now. Okay, so I've done a couple things since last section there. I rotated the steering wheel all the way to the driver's side so that I can get at these caliper mount bolts better. And I also got the caliper off and wired it up to the spring there. The other thing I want to point out, when you jack something up, I use wood blocks. I guess jack stands are fine too. use something. Don't use concrete blocks. They can collapse. So added a hammer and a block of wood to my list too, in case you're just replacing the pads. Well, I guess if you're replacing the pads, you don't need to go any further than this. You don't take the rotor off. So, but I don't really like pounding on the face of the rotor with a hammer there. But, and actually, my cousin taught me was that instead of pounding on the back face, you pound here in between the lug nut bolts. That seems to loosen it up better to get it off there. Anyway, so I've also got this 18-inch power bar here. You need something to twist those since they're not very loose. I will give the torque specs on all these things later in the video. Okay, finally got the rotor ready to come off of there. Now, the way I did that was just like I said. Initially, I pounded with the hammer. This is a mini sledge, anyway. Pounded in between the bolt holes. Then I took the wood block, put it on the face of the rotor, and started pounding. As you can see, the wood block's kind of dying. Basically, what I found was hit different places, like go side to side, top and bottom, and also put it on the inside and hit it. And eventually, it started loosening up. I could see a little bit of movement, just a little bit. Then I put it on the inside, give it a smack on the front, and then a smack on the back, and finally it started working its way off. So it is a little bit of a process, and I gave the hub here a couple of swats too, so I'll have to file that off flat again. But that's basically how it works here. I see that my splash shield's completely missing here. It's a piece of sheet metal that shields the inside of the rotor there. But apparently it's not the end of the world if you don't have one of those. So anyway, we're continuing on here, starting to put it back together. Okay, so here's another tool I neglected to mention. In this case, I got a 4-inch C-clamp. See it there? Anyway, it's like this. Anyway, this is a 6-inch, but you don't need one that big. 4-inch. You got to push the caliper piston all the way back in to allow room for your much thicker new pads. Also, I'd recommend some anti-seize. You paint it on the hub where the rotor sits there, in case you may have to remove it at some point in the future. So we got the new rotor here. One thing about these, generally speaking, when they come, they have a preservative, like a grease or some film on them. So you'll want to clean that with mineral spirits or something. All the surfaces here, both sides, where the a little bit of rust on her there, where the pads rub. Anyways, you don't have to worry about inside, these areas. Just the surface that breaks your car. Otherwise, if you don't clean that off, I don't know, it could cause some problems like sticky pads and things. So anyway, just clean that surface off. You have to do it. You have to clean it off with, say, Varsol or mineral spirits or some type of paint remover or something like that to get that off of there. Anyway, sorry to stress the point, but you got to do it or it could cause you problems. So what I do here, I just turn this end down. I got it centered on the bolt there. You have to have flat surface to mount it on. I know there's a special tool for this, but I don't have one. So squeeze her down till the piston stops moving, and then you're ready to go with the caliper there. So I got the rotor all cleaned off there. Just wanted to mention also, you could steal some of the wife's fingernail polish remover. That's basically acetone. That would do the job too. It saves you having to go out and buy something at the auto parts store or something. So fingernail polish remover will work for cleaning the rotor. And then I've got it all, got the hub all anti-seized up there, and I filed off the bumps that I put on it there with the hammer. Give her a few good smacks there by accident. So, and I have the piston pushed all the way in there on the caliper, The other thing I'm going to mention, this guy right here on your axle, that's what the ABS senses. So if there's a split anywhere in here, it can cause your ABS to act up. I had that problem on this. Very light braking pressure, it started putting the ABS on bone dry pavement. So a split ring here can cause you problems. So time to put the rotor onto the car. So I got the rotor on. I think you'll find that the lock bolt there, the pattern will only line up one direction with it. You just got to make sure you can see all 5 of your lug nut bolt holes there, and then just tighten it up a reasonable amount. There's no torque spec, just make sure it's not going to fall out. Then you install your caliper mount, then put the pads in the caliper and assemble it on there. So you want to go ahead and torque your caliper lock bolts, mount bolts to 70 foot-pounds, and then you're ready to mount the pads into the caliper. The one with the spring on it here, of course, goes into the piston side, so I can't hold the camera and do that at the same time, but that's the way they go. And then of course the flat one goes to the outside of the caliper there. So I'll go ahead and install those, and then I'll mount it on the car there. So I got the pads in the caliper there, and I got it sitting in its mount. Now it's time for the 2 lock pins there. You slide them in, they bottom out, and they can be a little bit of fun to get to find the hole there. You wiggle a caliper around and things, and screw it in, twisting, and eventually it'll find where it belongs there. Next thing I did after tightening up the caliper bolts, and speaking of which, after you do that, you can put the rubber cap back in, was to go inside the car and step on the brake pedal once. It basically goes to the floor, and let it up slow, then step on it again, and then you should start feeling brake pressure. So you're moving the piston out to fill up all the extra space you had when you pushed the piston in there, and now the pads are against the rotor. Everything's good. Then I installed this spring here, and I'll just zoom in on it there, show you how it goes. So it goes in back of these casting things there, and comes along and goes in these 2 holes here. I had some problems with that in the past, so that's why I wanted to show you how that installs there. Maybe I'm just not the best mechanic and have issues with things, I don't know. But anyway, so there, I'm all done. The other thing is, if you get any grease or anything on the rotor face, you'll want to wipe that off. And now it's time to install the tire. Now, living here in the Rust Belt, what I do, I take and smear some grease right around the circle there on the inside, so that the rim doesn't rust to the hub here. Makes removal later on much easier. Anyway, hope this video has helped anyone out that's doing the front brakes on a Saturn L series car. So everybody have a good one.